Cool, man. Well, yeah, appreciate you joining here. I think we got some interesting things to talk about as we sort of have been baking out and building out our migration of our data architecture that used to live solely on Azure AWS's individual components to Fabric. And I think I was telling you this earlier that I was almost like anti-Fabric for a while, and then as we started building out, I really started to see the value of it. So actually a quick introduction, I guess things we're going to be sharing. This is Vimal Vachhani, the CEO of CREx Software. And I love, Julie, if you want to introduce yourself as well, we could go
Yeah.
right into what we're about to talk about.
Yeah. Julian Munoz, senior consultant here at CREx. Kind of more of the lead fabric architect here, and just in general, just 10 data engineering experience.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I think you led the charge for us to start moving our out of the box sort of default solution to Fabric, right? So for
Right.
those that are not familiar with it, I mean, essentially, one of our key competencies is, if you have series of the your classic PropTech property management tools, whether it's like Yardi or MRI or Procore or Argus, we've been building data warehouses on that for years, which is, this first step towards building analytics on top of it, which is the second step to getting to like a full AI program. And then, as we learned, like, it was a lot of rinse and repeat code. Um, and from my consulting career prior, we found that, if the big companies, the Brookfields and the JLLs can afford these projects, whereas smaller companies just couldn't. But it was more of a data volume issue, right? It's not the complexity of the code changes. So
Right.
how do you build something repeatable? And that's sort of what we started working on 2021, and we built out a framework that's, well, we're able to get you sort of like 80% of what you need if you have the core systems for reports, for analytics, rent rolls and financial systems,
Yeah.
and a bedrock for what hasn't changed in many years for us is our data model, which is robust enough and hopefully doesn't have to change too much, and it could stay rigid just because a balance sheet hasn't changed in
Right.
what, 50 years. But
Yeah.
what you opened my eyes up to was moving to Fabric. So instead of before we'd spin up Azure Blob Storage, Azure Data Factory, Power BI, Synapse, or SQL Server, and then we make all the tools talk to each other again, repeatable, but
Right.
with roadblocks. So yeah, I'd love to hear from your perspective, like what you told me on like why Fabric.
Yeah. And then just to kind of elaborate too, right? It's not just the tools that you're having to get separately and kind of then build out the integration between all of it, right? It's also the objects beneath, like underneath that, right? You need to be able to manage all your tables, and you have to do your create tables separately here, and then you need to make sure that, the managed principles are all set up here and here and there. So it's a lot more involved as well. And so I think that's really the big selling point for Fabric, right? Is that out the box, you get Data Factory, what they're relabeling Fabric Data Factory, but it's essentially the same thing we're all normally used to if we've used Data Factory. They have all the Copilot integration, the governance piece, I think is the biggest selling point, which is most organizations, if they have, they're going to have Office 365 already. So more than likely they have a Entra ID or Microsoft Entra ID. Like the fact that you can kind of just already integrate to that and then now hand out your permissions and, your data governance. Maybe you want this domain or department, right? Not to see XYZ data points. Like it's just a
And
click of a button, right?
yeah, and I think that was super important, right? It was that so many folks already come in the door and they're like, well, we ask like, what email are you using? Well, we're using Office 365. 1 out of 10 will say Google, but it still works. But 9 out of 10 are already in that ecosystem. So then, before we'd have to work through like licensing and configuration and all the Enter ID stuff. And that's great because then you're like, cool, you're already in Office 365. Go
Right.
provision Fabric, go do your Power BI licensing. I'm sure it makes life for the IT person significantly easier because like we don't do that
Right.
either, right? Like we're not Office 365 admins, but the person doing it before we would say, hey, can you go spin up an Azure Blob Storage V2? And they're like, I don't know what that is. So yeah, it does
Right.
it does abstract that away.
Yeah. But yeah, and just to elaborate even more with Fabric now, specifically on the warehousing side, right? Is you're really now you have this world now where you can actually be, depending on where your organization wants to be, right? Or even if you have an IT department or not, there's really a lot of different avenues you can take this, right? So you can leverage, let's say you have an in-house engineer or two, or you have a whole team, right? And you want to leverage the Lakehouse in a very modern architectural way, you have the ability to do so. If you're a team that's a little bit more used to just doing T-SQL and more like traditional data warehousing, you can go that avenue, or you can do a mixture of the two. Let's say you don't have an IT department at all. And I think this is the one thing we were just talking about, right? Is you can use the data uploader, if you will, right, in Fabric to load Excel files, CSV files. And now it's already in the data lake, right? So you don't have to be this person that needs to understand how data lakes work and, all the intricacies behind all of that, right? It's really now giving if you will, the citizen, right, access and the ability to save data. It doesn't need to be this orchestrated, fully fledged out engineering project, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's the beautiful point.
The part that drives me crazy with Microsoft is their rebranding and their restructuring of the same product. So like, I'll bring up the diagram that you drew as well, because I'm a visual person and it helps me kind of get my head around that. But like, even like the Lakehouse, they're like, well, Fabric has Lakehouse, Lakehouse, Lakehouse.
Mhm.
And for me, I was like, well, why is that fundamentally different than like a blob storage? And once we got in there, I got my head around it, I was like, oh, it actually is a Gen 2 blob storage. It's the same thing we've been doing in Azure,
Yep.
just sort of rebranded.
Yep.
Exact same technology. I'm like, okay, so that makes sense. So then when you take sort of our old fundamental framework and we put it here, it was the same thing, right? Like we're able to store data in a data lake slash lakehouse slash blob storage. It's synonymous. Nothing's changed here. So to be able to take what we were doing prior, where we would snapshot the data, you'd have the live data, and then you have the archive information. Again, that ended up becoming, I think you helped do this, was like almost like a near copy paste.
Right.
Is my assumption correct that Lakehouse and the Gen 2 blob storage is the same thing?
It's exactly the same thing. So the only
Okay.
difference there is one, you're getting more of a managed service, if you will, versus ADLS Gen 2, just, the product itself, right? You're having to manage that a little bit. So what Microsoft is doing is just taking that and then putting a managed services around it, and then also applying some of these like, governance and security things around, right? So like, you and I, we've talked about SaaS tokens, right? How would you do that in Fabric? Well, you have the same ability to do so, but now these SaaS tokens are OAuth tokens that only last for an hour minimum, right? So it is a little bit more governance in there. They're doing all the tricky security parts for you. But again, Fabric, you can do shortcuts to different ADLS Gen 2. So you don't have to utilize the one lake to be your physical storage location. You still use outside, you can even be an S3 bucket. You can use outside data lakes and then just shortcut them into your one lake. So now you can query them without that data physically living inside your lake house, right? Or your one
Okay.
lake house. So there's a lot of different options for sure. The one thing that I think also people are not really utilizing in Fabric is the mirrored database. So think of like a lot of these operational databases, or maybe let's just say you went through a whole architectural change 5, 6 years ago, and you don't really have the appetite to change all your application systems, right? Well, you can mirror that data if it's in a SQL database, Postgres, whatever, Snowflake, whatever, even Databricks, I think it even has a mirroring option. What Microsoft is doing right now is you could, based off of how much capacity you buy, let's just say you do an F8 SKU, you get 8 TB of free mirroring data from an operational data store down to the one lake, right? And you just have to enable change data capture. So as soon as that application changes, right, that application database, that data is already mirrored inside Fabric. So now what we're really talking about Fabric is a unified, like a true business intelligence product that I think Microsoft's been trying to do for a very long time, right? In different, to your point, in different products and different things. But I think I don't know, I think Fabric is kind of meshing that bridge, and it's really going to become a reality where you can really solution a lot of your analytics in this one platform.
Okay. So one point of confusion for me still, and I hope
Yeah.
you clear up, is that previously we had SQL database, then they moved to Synapse, which used like virtual external tables,
Yeah.
and then now we have Fabric. What is the Fabric, or the Fabric warehouse? Is that blob storage? Is that a new version of Synapse? Is it just a beefed up SQL server? Is it
Yeah.
all of the above?
Yeah. So they modeled a lot of the Lakehouse and the warehouse based off of what they've learned from Synapse. Um, so,
So it
but
is
I just,
it is materialized, right? Like it is like landed
yeah,
data. It's not external tables.
no, they're not external tables. These are definitely materialized. And so that's where you have the files section, which is really going to be your raw files. And then the tables are really going to be more centered around Delta tables, really.
Okay. Yeah, and the good news is that no matter whatever that underlying architecture is, because I feel like most people that the business users don't care, they as long as the data lines up, is that the data model itself still is the same, right? So like your dim property, your dim tenant, your fact rent roll, all of the data, all of that dimensional model we've been working with for years is we've been able to just redeploy in Fabric, and now it's scripted, right? So everyone's getting the same thing. So all we're doing is asking folks, what are your property types? Are you commercial? Well, then it's going to be this. Do you want financial? Well, here's your financial model.
Right.
And that remains the same. One thing on this diagram, now that I'm looking at it, I feel like this might be wrong, is that isn't Fabric technically this? Because it doesn't include the Power BI, or does it?
The reason why, picture a Venn diagram, right? And you have the left side Fabric and the right side Power BI. In the middle is kind of where that they kind of interlap, right? And so Fabric, what it can do is, let's just kind of take you down an ETL really basic, right? We go and grab these files. We go and now build out a whole dim fact model around it. Well, what's the next step naturally is then to push that up to Power BI, right? Via the
Yeah.
semantic layer. Maybe it's just a direct query where you refresh, right? Fabric within the pipeline, and that's something that's not shown here, right? That we didn't really show here, but you can just bake in at the very end of it, hey, go direct refresh the Power BI dashboard or go refresh the semantic layer, right? And it's just a drag and drop activity, and you kind of just do that. You don't have to do this outside, make an API call or logic apps, right, to go refresh this or
Got it.
have to be really tight with your scheduling. It's all
And
baked in.
maybe the confusion for me then is from a licensing standpoint though, because I think Power BI is its own licensing unless you hit like I think it's x64 Fabric. Because if you do x64 Fabric, you get Power BI, and if you don't, you're paying per user. So
Right.
it is nice to have that flexibility, but I think that's where initially it threw me off on like if Fabric
Yeah.
always included Power BI, then it's like a no-brainer, and it still is like seems like a good path forward. But especially if you get to the x64 and the Power BI are included, and you have over like 400 users in your enterprise, then it's absolutely like
Yeah.
the way to
And just
go.
to be clear, yeah, the F64 is free reader licenses for
Mm,
your entire enterprise, including your guest. I'll have to double check on the guest part, but essentially your entire enterprise will have a reader access. So they do not have to have a license. But if you want to still be a creator, even if you're over the F64 capacity, you still need to have a Power BI Pro license, which would run you $14 each one. But for most organizations, they only have what, 5, 6, maybe 10 that's being
yeah, that's what I always tell folks is that initially they're like, oh, everyone should have Reader, and you don't, right? Because like 90% of your users are going to be here in Power BI. They just want to log in, they want to push a button, they want to get data out, and then move on with their day.
yeah.
And then only this percentage here, which is probably 7%, will need that editor access because they're the ones that understand the data domain. They're building reports. And then you have like that small percentage, I think, what's the remainder? 3%, which are
Yeah.
your data scientists that need data in its raw format. So it enables your entire like analytics platform. But most people are down here, and they just want to get email
Yeah.
reports emailed to them every night. And again, once this data model is rigid, and then you get the ability to build very rigid reports on top of it, sort of rinse and repeat. The last thing that we talked about a couple of days ago was like the bursting, right? So if you're paying for a Fabric capacity, is there ability like on Azure you could like ramp up and down services, so you're only paying for what you need, like when you're doing data processing. What's the equivalent of that in Fabric, or is there?
So yeah, so you would scale, let's say you're at an F2 capacity and you, for whatever reason, didn't plan, or you just have a very high traffic month, whatever it is. If you have the pay as you go model, what it'll do is that bursting option will like this is where Microsoft kind of handles a lot of that automatic tuning, where what they'll do is they'll kind of up your capacity for and it's automatic. You don't even notice it. You just have to enable the bursting option. And so what I'll do is it'll just upgrade you to an F4, for instance, right? And it'll allow you to kind of essentially rent out, right, that compute for that amount of that a lot of time that you needed, and then it automatically brings you back down to F2. And then the way that it prices it out is it kind of smooths out the pricing. So you'll notice that upcharge in very incremental. So instead of having one giant swoop for the next month billing, you're going to get it kind of more broken out. That's kind of the general understanding of how that works. But definitely, you're not going to be stuck and throttled if you don't have enough, if you didn't account for enough compute.
Got it. And that's helpful, because I know we see the world very like through the lens of real estate and then tangentially financial services. But yeah. I mean, what you just sort of shared is for anyone looking to kind of spin up a Fabric program and the value of it. So awesome, man. Well, this is super helpful. I know we're at time here, but yeah, hopefully I know we got cut off here, but maybe we'll do this again and start digging into some of these pieces, man. This is great.
Yeah.